Good evening. Tonight's story is a bit of a downer, folks. We're diving into a conflict that has been simmering for years and is now reignited with a vengeance. We're diving headfirst into the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, a situation that's about as fun as a root canal performed by a mime with carpal tunnel. This conflict has been a source of immense suffering and geopolitical tension, affecting not just the region, but the entire world. What began as a simmering conflict in 2014 with Russia's annexation of Crimea has exploded into a full-blown war, complete with tanks, missiles, and enough geopolitical tension to power a small city. The annexation of Crimea was just the beginning, a prelude to a much larger and more devastating conflict. The conflict, for those of you who haven't been following along at home, and frankly who could blame you, stems from a complex web of historical grievances, territorial disputes, and good old-fashioned power politics. The roots of this conflict go deep, tracing back to centuries of shared and contested history between Ukraine and Russia. Russia, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, seems determined to reassert its dominance over its smaller neighbor, while Ukraine, understandably, is fighting tooth and nail to maintain its independence. The stakes are incredibly high, with national sovereignty and regional stability hanging in the balance. The situation is incredibly volatile, with both sides dug in and the potential for things to spiral out of control terrifyingly real. The international community watches with bated breath, as any misstep could lead to a broader conflict, drawing in neighboring countries and potentially sparking a larger war. Efforts for peace have been ongoing, with numerous diplomatic meetings and international interventions, but a lasting resolution remains elusive. The world is watching, hoping for a peaceful end to this tragic chapter, but preparing for the worst. Amidst the chaos, humanitarian efforts continue, with aid organizations working tirelessly to provide relief to those affected. The resilience of the Ukrainian people is on full display as they rebuild their lives and communities, even in the face of such adversity. In the end, it's the human stories that remind us of the true cost of conflict. Families torn apart, lives disrupted, and dreams shattered. Yet amidst the ruins there is hope, resilience, and a determination to forge a better future. As we continue to follow this story, let's not forget the importance of striving for peace and understanding. The path to resolution may be fraught with challenges, but it is a journey worth undertaking for the sake of future generations. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay informed, stay compassionate, and let's hope for a brighter tomorrow. Now, to make matters worse, Russia's been playing with some seriously scary toys lately. We're talking about hypersonic missiles, the kind of weapons that make cruise missiles look like toy airplanes. These bad boys can travel at multiple times the speed of sound, making them incredibly difficult to track and intercept. Imagine trying to swat a fly with a tennis racket while blindfolded and riding a unicycle. That's basically what we're dealing with here. Russia's recent test of a hypersonic missile, which they claim can hit targets in Europe and the United States, has sent shockwaves through the international community. It's a blatant display of military might, and a not-so-subtle reminder that Putin's not afraid to escalate things if he feels threatened. The global response to Russia's actions has been swift and, for the most part, unified. The United States, the European Union, and a host of other countries have slapped Russia with a dizzying array of sanctions, targeting everything from banks and oligarchs to exports and energy. Think of it as the international community's way of giving Russia a very stern talking to, albeit one that involves economic pain and diplomatic isolation. Beyond sanctions, NATO allies have been pouring military aid into Ukraine, providing weapons, training, and intelligence support. It's a delicate balancing act, though. The West wants to help Ukraine defend itself without provoking Russia into a wider conflict. It's like trying to put out a grease fire with a super soaker. You want to douse the flames, but you don't want to make things worse. To understand the current conflict, it's crucial to look back at Ukraine's long and often tragic history. This history is marked by invasions, occupations, and a constant struggle for sovereignty. From the Mongol invasions in the 13th century to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's control in the 16th and 17th centuries, Ukraine has rarely known peace. Sandwiched between Russia and Europe, Ukraine has been a crossroads of empires and a battleground for centuries. The country has seen the rise and fall of many powers, including the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and most notably, the Russian Empire. Each of these powers left an indelible mark on Ukraine's cultural and political landscape, It's a country with a complex national identity, divided between those who identify more closely with Russia and those who see Ukraine as a distinct and independent nation. This division is not just cultural but also linguistic and religious, with the western part of the country leaning more towards Europe and the eastern part having stronger ties to Russia. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 gave Ukraine a shot at independence, a moment that was celebrated with great enthusiasm. However, this newfound independence came with its own set of challenges, including economic instability and political corruption. But it also left the country with a large Russian-speaking population, particularly in the eastern and southern regions. This demographic reality has been a source of tension, as many Russian-speaking Ukrainians feel a strong connection to Russia, and a simmering separatist movement in the eastern Donbas region. This area has been a flashpoint for conflict, with separatists receiving support from Russia, leading to a protracted and bloody conflict that has claimed thousands of lives. This is where things get really messy. The conflict in Donbas is not just a local issue, but a geopolitical one, drawing in international players and complicating efforts for peace. Putin sees Ukraine not as a separate nation but as an artificial creation, a view that is deeply rooted in his vision of a greater Russia. He believes that Ukraine's independence is a historical mistake that needs to be corrected, a historical aberration that must be brought back into the fold. This perspective is not just about territorial control, but also about cultural and historical dominance. It's a view rooted in a distorted interpretation of history, one that selectively highlights certain events while ignoring others. This narrative is propagated through state-controlled media and educational systems in Russia, but one that holds considerable sway in Russia. Many Russians see Ukraine as an integral part of their own history and identity, making the conflict not just a political issue, but a deeply emotional one as well. Section 5: Putin's Gamble, Miscalculations and Imperial Ambitions. Putin's decision to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has been widely condemned as a colossal strategic blunder. The world watched in shock as Russian forces crossed the border, initiating a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences. It's a move that has united the West against Russia, devastated the Russian economy, and left Putin increasingly isolated on the world stage. The sanctions imposed by Western nations have crippled the Russian economy, causing the ruble to plummet and leading to widespread economic hardship. So why do it? Well, as with most things involving Putin, the answer is murky and likely involves a toxic cocktail of imperial ambition, paranoia, and a fundamental misunderstanding of Ukraine. Putin has long harbored dreams of restoring Russia to its former Soviet glory, seeing Ukraine as an integral part of that vision. His speeches often reflect a deep-seated belief in a historical and cultural unity between Russia and Ukraine, a belief not shared by many Ukrainians. Putin seems to have genuinely believed that the invasion would be a quick and relatively painless affair, a blitzkrieg that would topple the Ukrainian government and bring the country back under Russian control. He underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainian people and the readiness of their military forces. The initial stages of the invasion saw fierce resistance from Ukrainian soldiers and civilians alike. Instead, he's found himself bogged down in a bloody and protracted conflict, one that has exposed the weaknesses of the Russian military and the resilience of the Ukrainian people. The world has witnessed the courage and determination of Ukrainians as they defend their homeland, turning what was supposed to be a swift victory for Russia into a prolonged and costly war. The conflict has not only reshaped the geopolitical landscape but also highlighted the perils of underestimating a nation's will to fight for its sovereignty. Section 6: The West's Dilemma Between Support and Provocation. The West faces an agonizing dilemma in Ukraine. On the one hand, there's a moral imperative to support a democratic country under attack by a larger and more powerful neighbor. On the other hand, there's the very real risk that providing too much support could escalate the conflict into a wider war, one that could potentially draw in NATO and Russia. It's a tightrope walk, and one with no easy answers. Some argue that the West needs to take a more aggressive stance, providing Ukraine with even more advanced weaponry and potentially even imposing a no-fly zone over the country. Others caution against such moves, arguing that they would be seen as acts of war by Russia and could lead to a catastrophic escalation. Section 7: Whispers of World War: A Growing Unease. The conflict in Ukraine has revived old fears of a new Cold War, or worse, a direct military confrontation between Russia and the West. The specter of nuclear weapons, while still unlikely, hangs heavy over the conflict, a chilling reminder of the stakes involved. Public anxiety is palpable. Polls show that people around the world are increasingly worried about the possibility of a wider conflict, and the rhetoric from both sides has done little to allay those fears. It's a dangerous game of brinksmanship, one that could easily spiral out of control. Section 8. The price of conflict, human cost, and global instability. The human cost of the conflict in Ukraine is already staggering. Thousands of civilians have been killed, and millions more have been displaced from their homes. The war has also had a devastating impact on the global economy, disrupting supply chains, fueling inflation, and exacerbating food insecurity in many parts of the world. The conflict is a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the globalized world and how even regional conflicts can have far-reaching consequences. Section 9. The path forward: diplomacy, dialogue, and de-escalation. So, what's the way out of this mess? The only viable path forward is through diplomacy, dialogue, and a commitment to de-escalation. That means finding ways to address Russia's legitimate security concerns without compromising Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It also means finding a way to rebuild trust between Russia and the West, a task that seems almost impossible given the current climate of hostility. It won't be easy, and it will require compromise from all sides. But the alternative, a protracted conflict that could spill over into a wider war, is simply too terrible to contemplate. We'll be right back.